In this tutorial, you will learn how to solve the Rubik's Cube using a simple layer-based method. The first step is to assemble the top layer. There are no sequences to memorize here, just common sense. The second step is to assemble the second layer by executing easy-to-remember 8 move sequences to put the side cubies in their places. Then we turn the cube over and assemble the top layer. First, we get a cross on top. Then we put the corner cubies in their places. Then we orient the corner cubies correctly. And finally, we permute the side cubies of the top layer, and the cube is solved. Let's agree on the following terminology. We will call the individual movable components of the Rubik's Cube, CUBIES. There are 26 cubies altogether, 6 center cubies, which are fixed to each other. 12 side cubies. And 8 corner cubies. The cube's 6 faces are designated as follows. F for the front face. L for the left face. R for the right face. U for the upper face. D for the down face. And B for the back face. All solving sequences in this tutorial use the standard cube notation. A letter, such as L, by itself, means the corresponding face is to be turned 90 degrees clockwise. A letter followed by an apostrophe, such as F', means the face is to be turned 90 degrees counterclockwise. And finally, a letter followed by the number 2 means the face is to be turned 180 degrees in any direction. Let's begin with a fully assembled cube and position it so that its white face is on top, and red face at the front. Let's scramble it with the following scrambling sequence. Now, let's solve this cube, beginning with the top layer. Our goal is to make the entire top face white. The side and corner cubies must be positioned in such a way that they match up with the center cubies of the adjacent faces. For example, this spot will end up with the white and green side cubie to match up with these white and green center cubies. This white and blue side cubie already conveniently has its white side up. Let's slide it in its right position to match up with the white and blue center cubies, right here. Luckily, the white and orange side cubie has fallen into its place too. This side cubie can be put in its place quite easily. The last side cubie is here. It can be put in place as follows. Now let's take care of the corner cubies, starting with this one. Let's position the white square of that cubie right underneath the corner spot where it belongs. These 3 moves will do the job. This corner cubie has its white side up, but is in the wrong spot. Let's bring it down to the bottom and position it underneath the spot where it belongs. We will use the mirror of the same 3 moves to put it into its spot. This corner cubie has its white side down. We will put it into its spot as follows. Only one corner cubie remains, and it slides into its spot easily. The top layer is finished. Now let's assemble the middle layer. It is time to memorize some solving sequences. The 2 mirror sequences used in step 2 move a side cubie from the bottom layer to the middle layer, as shown by the red arrows on diagrams number 1 and number 2. Before executing a sequence, you need to make the letter T. If the side cubie is already in the right spot but oriented incorrectly, as shown on diagram number 3, it needs to be pushed out by inserting an arbitrary cubie in its place from the bottom layer using one of the 2 sequences. At the bottom layer, look for a side cubie without a yellow square, such as this one, then turn the bottom layer to make the letter T. The letter T is on the left, so execute sequence number 2. Next, let's position this cubie. It is already part of the letter T. It is on the left again, so let's use the same sequence. Next, let's take care of this cubie. Turn the bottom layer to make the letter T. It is on the left again, so use sequence 2. And the last cubie is handled the exact same way as the previous one, also with sequence 2. The middle layer is now complete. Flip the cube over. The bottom layer is now our top layer. Step 3 is to assemble a cross on top, as follows. There are 4 possible scenarios, as shown on these diagrams. Under scenarios 1 and 2, we need to execute a simple 6-move sequence. Under scenario 3, the sequences need to be executed twice. Under scenario 4, the cross is already assembled and we skip this step. In our case, we have scenario 3, therefore we will need to execute the sequences twice. The first time we can choose either sequence 1 or 2. Let's do sequence 1. Reposition the cube in such a way that the yellow pattern on top matches the pattern on the diagram. We now have scenario 2, so execute sequence 2. Step 3 is now complete. The goal of step 4 is to put all 4 corner cubies in their correct spots. At the end of step 4, each of the 4 corner cubies is matched up with the corresponding center cubies, although not necessarily correctly oriented. For example, this yellow, orange and blue corner cubie is not a match, as it is flanked by yellow, orange and green center cubies. But if we were to turn the top layer by 90 degrees, this corner cubie is now a match. On these diagrams, the matched corner cubies are denoted by bright green color. There are 4 possible scenarios. Under scenario 1, the 2 matches are adjacent to each other. An 8-step sequence needs to be executed to switch the other 2 cubies, as shown by the red arrow. Under scenario 2, the 2 matches are in the opposite corners. The sequence needs to be executed twice. Under scenario 3, there are no matches. The top layer needs to be turned until we find 2 or 4 matches. And under scenario 4, all 4 corners are matches, and we skip this step altogether. As mentioned previously, this corner cubie is not a match. As we turn the cube around, we find that none of the corner cubies are matches. Therefore, we have scenario 3, and we need to keep turning the top layer until some matches are found. If we turn the top layer by 90 degrees, we will find that we now have a match. In fact, we are lucky to have all 4 matches, so now we have scenario 4, and can skip this step altogether. However, we will still go ahead and execute our sequence to demonstrate what it does. Now, predictably, the 2 cubies on the left side are still matches, but the cubies on the right side are not. They have been switched, as shown by the red arrow on diagram number 1. We have artificially put ourselves in scenario 1. Make sure the 2 matched cubies are on the left side, and execute the sequence again. Step 4 is complete. We have positioned the corner cubies in their right spots. In step 5, we will orient them properly to make the top face completely yellow, as follows. Step 5 uses 2 mirror sequences shown on diagrams number 1 and number 2. Sequence number 1 leaves the near left cubie intact, and rotates the other 3 cubies clockwise. Sequence number 2 leaves the far left cubie intact, and rotates the other 3 cubies counterclockwise. Under scenarios 1 and 2, the yellow squares on the top face form what we call the fish pattern. If we have the fish pattern, the correct sequence only needs to be executed once. Under scenario 3, we do not have the fish pattern. In that case, we first need to execute sequence number 1 to make the fish pattern, and then we arrive at scenarios 1 or 2. Under scenario 4, the top face is already fully yellow, and we can skip this step altogether. In our case, we do not have the fish pattern. This means we will need to execute the sequences twice. To do it right, we need to determine which face is going to be our front face before executing sequence number 1. Let's randomly pick any face, except top and bottom, to be our front face. The question is, are we going to get the fish pattern after executing sequence number 1 from this position? The near left corner cubie will remain intact. Therefore, the top yellow square will remain on top. The far left corner cubie will rotate, and therefore the yellow square currently on top will not be on top anymore. The near right corner will rotate clockwise, and the yellow square will not get on top. The far right corner will rotate clockwise, and the yellow square will get on top. So, after executing sequence number 1, 2 corner squares will be yellow, and that is not the fish pattern. Therefore, this position is unsuitable. Let's look for another. Let's analyze it the same way. The near left corner cubie will be intact and the yellow square will not be on top. The far left corner cubie will rotate, and the yellow square will not be on top anymore. The near right corner cubie will rotate clockwise, and the yellow square will get on top. The far right corner cubie will rotate and the yellow square will not be on top anymore. Therefore, there will only be one yellow square on top, and we will get the fish pattern. We have found a suitable position. Let's execute sequence number 1. As expected, we now have the fish pattern. Since the corner cubies need to be rotated counterclockwise to get the yellow squares on top, sequence number 2 is in order. Before executing it, orient the fish pattern according to diagram number 2. Now proceed with sequence number 2. As you can see, the cube is now fully solved, but it is solved prematurely. There is usually still one last step to take, and to demonstrate it, we will need to execute this sequence. Now, this position is more typical for the end of step 5. We will use it to demonstrate step 6, permuting the side cubies. All that is left to do is permute the side cubies of the top layer. Under scenario 1, the front cubie needs to be pushed to the back one to the right, and the right one to the front, as shown by the red arrows on diagram number 1. This is done with sequence number 1. Under scenario 2, the back cubie needs to be pushed to the front one to the right, and the right one to the back. This is done with sequence number 2. Under scenario 3, all 4 side cubies need to be permuted. Sequence number 1 needs to be executed first, and then we arrive at scenarios 1 or 2. And under scenario 4, the cube is already fully solved, and we are done. In our case, one of the side cubies is already positioned correctly. Also, the front cubie needs to be pushed to the right. So we have scenario 2. Make sure the correctly oriented side cubie is on the left, and execute sequence number 2. The cube is solved. Now, let's quickly go over all the 6 steps again using a differently scrambled cube. The scrambling sequence is now this. The assembling of the top layer will be shown without comments. To assemble layer 2, we make the letter T and execute sequence 1 or 2 depending on which side the letter T is. Layer 2 is finished. Flip the cube over. Assemble the cross on top. We have scenario 1. Use sequence number 1. Step 3 is finished. Now, look for corner cubie matches. Currently we have none, or scenario 3. If we turn the top layer by 180 degrees, all corners are matches. We now have scenario 4 and skip this step. We do not have the fish pattern. Let's analyze the current position if it gives us the fish pattern after executing sequence number 1. The near left corner will be intact, and the yellow square will remain on top. The near right corner will turn clockwise and the yellow square will not get on top. The far left corner will turn clockwise, and the yellow square, not visible now, will get on top. The far right corner will turn clockwise, and the yellow square will not be on top anymore. Therefore, there will be 2 yellow squares on top, and we will not get the fish pattern. Let's look for another position. In this position, the near left corner will remain intact, and the yellow square will not get on top. The near right corner will turn clockwise and the yellow square will not be on top anymore. The far left corner will turn clockwise and the yellow square will not be on top anymore. The far right corner will turn clockwise, and the yellow square will get on top. Therefore, we will get the fish pattern from this position. Execute sequence number 1. Since the corner cubies need to be turned counterclockwise to get on top, we have scenario 2. Reposition the cube to have the fish pattern match diagram number 2, and execute sequence number 2. All 4 side cubies are positioned incorrectly. We have scenario 3. Execute sequence number 1. Position the correctly oriented side cubie on the left side. The front side cubie needs to be pushed to the right. We have scenario 2. Execute sequence number 2. The cube is solved. This concludes our tutorial. Check out our fully 3D printed Rubik's Cube solving robot. It is the perfect machine to introduce robotics to kids. Build your own at www.rcr3d.com.